So basically, the 100 Years' War started because of a succession dispute over France. So, yeah.
Oh, what?
Oh, I thought somebody was raising their hand.
Oh, no, I was just using my hands.
Oh, sorry.
I'm flinging them around.
So, yeah, well, we wait for the television to, I don't know, fix itself. Basically, the 100 Years' War started as a succession dispute over succession to the Kingdom of France, right? So, there were two warring powers, obviously. There's France, trying to maintain its independence, and England, who wanted to get control over France. So the King of England, who decided to press his claim to the French throne upon the death of the previous French king, I can't remember his name, it would be on the slide, but his name was Edward III of England. And he was a Plantagenet, who were the ruling family of England. And the reason why he had a claim on the French throne is because it was through his mother, I believe. Because she was related to the French royal family.
Is that Marie of Guise?
What?
Was it Marie of Guise?
I don't know. I don't think you're thinking of somebody else. I don't. But basically, the thing here is that he was claiming it through his mother, and that is, if you know anything about the Salic law or the succession law of France, inheritance through the female line is not exactly ideal from the standpoint of that law, because it was male line descendants only, right? But there was a problem because the King of France didn't have any relatives closer than Edward, right? So he was claiming it even through a shaky female line claim. It was, pretty much the closest blood relative that could claim it. The other claimant, his name was Charles V of France, yes, I think so, and he was elected by French nobles so that way they wouldn't have an English king. Now, the fun thing about that is that actually the English king, he was more French than he was English because he was from the Norman bloodline, right? So they would have spoke French as their first language, and very seldom would use English unless they're talking to their subjects. Yes. So basically, it was more like one French guy who just happened to live in England fighting a French guy who lived on the continent. And that was kind of how it was. It wasn't an ideal situation by any means, especially considering that the war lasted over a century. Now, the war was not continuous. It had two pieces during the war where basically both sides said, like, hey, time out, we're broke.
Okay.
Yeah, because they started to run out of money because you can only generate so much money with a agricultural medieval economy. So, and also to mention that they didn't have professional armies. Knights had a certain number of days that they had to serve the king for, and the peasantry, well, they kind of have to like make food in order to survive. So if you take them away from their farms for a long enough amount of time, that could cause some detrimental effects. It's been 5 minutes.
Yeah.
I think it's been. I hope the TV was working out. Sorry, for those of you who came in, the TV was not working at all. It had a horrible. Oh, see, there we go. Huh? It's back.
Still on.
Oh, great. That's
unusual.
So, yeah, I'm sure.
I've never ever had that happen. Oh, yeah.
Try.
We're gonna change it back here a second here. Boy, this is not ideal.
Just wait and see if it does on a different channel, and if it does, then it's a connection to your computer.
Oh, it could be that. Yeah.
Can somebody at our front desk do that? Because they operate this thing every
Yeah,
night for the movie.
I think we ought to go get somebody who
Okay.
works here. If I
You want
can.
me to call? I'll call them if you want me to.
Okay, yes.
Okay.
Call somebody up here.
Call them.
Yeah, because they do our movies every night. Okay, hold on.
Okay. Well, let me
Just
just.
replug it in.
Watch
I'm
TV.
working on that, sir. I don't know what it's doing.
I'm gonna call it right now.
Come on, just.
I think this is right.
Okay, it's plugged in real good now.
Are you okay?
No.
Come on to the front desk.
Oh, it's working! Okay, we don't need the front desk. So, yeah, we're gonna start with the actual presentation now. So yes, I mentioned all of these things. 100 Years' War actually lasted 116 years. It was started by Edward III of England to claim the French throne after the death of Charles IV in 1328. And initially, right before the actual war started, his invasion, he, kind of was pretending that he accepted the new king. He's lying. And Philip of Valois was selected as Charles VI to be king of France. So he changed his name in order to gain legitimacy and continuity, right? Because a lot of the previous kings, there have been 5 Charleses already this early. Wow, So they, before they chose Louis to be the name of every French king, it was Charles. And also, if you've ever heard of Joan of Arc, who hasn't? Joan of Arc, this is the Joan of Arc War. But she's not going to come along until way late in the war. And Edward the Black Prince, he was the English side's, very famous character. So here's a map. So you see the red bit down there in the southwest? Yeah, southwest. That's Gascony, and that actually belonged to England. But not belonged to England as part of England. It belonged to the King of England as a vassal to the King of France. So technically, the King of England has to lower himself to the level of Duke of Gascony to pay homage to the King of France. So it was sort of a weird situation of his vassal was also at war with him, but also at war with him as a foreign country. So it's like an attack from, 2 areas coming in. So England controlled large parts of France. Gascony was important due to the wine trade. And, even today, we talk about Gascon wine, right? And then up here in Flanders, which didn't actually belong to England, but it was economically significant to England due to their imports of English wool, because they were a textile manufacturing center. So basically, these 2 economic interests were also involved in the war, too, because if Edward could become king of France as well as England, he would be able to get money from the taxation of those 2 areas. Okay, so television's still being a little funny, but anyway. Then there was a guy named Robert III of Artois, who was an enemy of the King of France. There was a political problem. I'm not going to go into it, but it was sufficiently contentious. He fled to England to escape justice at the hands of the king. And the King of England was like, hey, you can come and hang out here. We're not going to do anything to you. And France demanded his extradition. And the refusal of England to extradite Robert proved to be another casus belli for the war. So it wasn't just England attacking France wantonly. France was also like, hey, maybe we should go to war with them anyway, right? So both sides were kind of like, we need to go to war with each other, right? So the French invaded Gascony while Edward was attempting to raise money for the war, and Gascony's defenders were caught into a siege situation. So they were entirely surrounded on all sides except the water. England was able to provide them with reinforcements and supplies through the water. And England, at this time, was not actually the naval power that it would become compared to France. France had a much larger navy than England in the early part of the war. Enter the Continental Assault and the Battle of Sluys. I think that's how you pronounce that. I don't know. But Edward's army invaded continental Europe, and he went to go and attack the Prince Bishopric of Cambrai, which was not part of France, but it was a France-adjacent part of the Holy Roman Empire, which was aligned with France. And then he later retreated from the continent after raiding the countryside. 99% of this war is divided into 2 things. Raids in the countryside or castle sieges. There were very few field battles. And this is really, the most of medieval warfare is either raiding the countryside or besieging a castle. So the Battle of Sluys commenced at sea when the French attempted to invade England, but they were defeated by England, prefiguring the English naval supremacy in centuries to come. So if you want to know what is the origin of the wooden walls of Britain, it's this battle right here. So after this, there was a period in the war called the War of the Breton Succession. So this is like a mini war inside the 100 Years' War. There's a couple of these smaller conflicts that are related to the greater war, but can also be considered a war of themselves. So the Duke of Brittany, which is the northwestern part of France, right here, this one right here, the sticky outy bit, called Armorica by the Romans, but Brittany because the Bretons live there. And I don't want to go into them, but they're pretty interesting. And they're a minority group in France that has their own language, and there's a lot of friction between them and the other French people because they like having their own language. And if there's one thing that you know about French people, it's language chauvinism, right? Right? So that's why Britons and other Frenchies don't play super well together. But anyway, the Duke of Brittany died in 1341, prompting two rival claimants backed by France and England to continue the war in Brittany. So it wasn't just a war over France, but also now it's a war over Brittany, because Brittany doesn't know who their new duke is. So John of Montfort was backed by England, and France backed a guy named Charles of Blois. Charles of Blois.
Wow.
Okay, I can't do it. I'm terrible at this, you know. The struggle in Brittany, centered around a town called Vannes.
Van.
Okay. And went back and forth, for a period of years. They were trying to take over that town, and the English would come and take over that town, the French would come and take over that town. So by the end of it, it was basically in ruins. The town that they were fighting over, right? Alongside contemporary operations down in Gascony, because Gascony is also on fire at this point too. French will come and raid, the English will come and raid. So basically imagine being a peasant person, just living in the two theaters of operations. There's, up here in Brittany and down here in Gascony. The English will show up one day and say, we're in charge of this place now, hand over all your stuff. French will come in the next day and say, we're in charge of this, hand it over all your stuff. So there was widespread economic devastation in all areas of the war. So this period of the war ended in 1364, favoring England, when John of Montfort was finally able to secure his control over Brittany. So basically the early part of the 100 Years' War is basically just England keeps beating France, over and over and over and over again. It's embarrassing for France. And then a really famous battle you might have heard of called the Battle of Crécy happened in July 1346. Edward launched another attack across the English Channel, and he landed on a place called the Cotentin Peninsula in Normandy. It's one of the sticky out bits of Normandy up here. Sorry, I keep going back to the map. That part of Normandy right here, I believe, is that where he landed. He raided a minor village called Saint-Vaast-la-Hougue. That's how you pronounce that. And Caen was also captured in one day by the English army. I'm sorry. I can't. Was captured in one day by the English army. So, he comes in and he makes a lightning attack and recaptures Normandy for England. And Normandy hadn't belonged to England for about 100 years at this point. And even though Normandy was the original starting point for French incursions into England, it had passed out of the control of the English royal family due to succession. King Philip put together his army and marched north after Edward, who was pillaging the entire north of France, like that economic devastation thing I was talking about earlier. So most of the river crossings had been intentionally destroyed, both by the English and the French, because they're like, oh, you better destroy that bridge, they might use it to come and attack us, right? And England was trying to get back over the channel and get back to England. Because as far as they were concerned, they'd taken their objective for this mission. They wanted to capture those two places. France was like, we need to corner the English army and destroy them. So eventually the French army was able to maneuver the English into a position. Unfortunately, while it was cutting them off from escape, the defensive position itself was favorable to England. And the Battle of Crécy commenced on 26 August 1346. And what was really impressive about this battle was it was the first time that peasant soldiers were able to defeat armored knights. Now, how did they do this? Well, it wasn't with the pike. That was a little bit off in the future. But they used the English longbow. You ever heard of the English longbow?
Mm-hmm.
Pretty much the HIMARS of medieval times. Because you just get a bunch of peasant guys and you have them train. There was a law in England that every Sunday it was legally required that you did archery practice if you were an adult male. No, it's true. You know, and so every guy had to have a bow. So the industry for manufacturing bows was quite heavily subsidized by the government. Because the English realized, hey, if we have lots of bows that can punch straight through French knights' armor, that's gonna like defeat their charges in one go, right? So basically the French knights did, you know, the same old tired tactic of charge, and then the English were like, surprise! And then their, you know, stupid French faces got arrows in between the eyes. Through their helmets too. So you can see here in the picture, we also have crossbows. Those were kind of the fancy, they weren't new, they were at least 100 and something years old at that point, but still. Over here on the English side, you know, you have your archers, and over here on the French, you know, coming in, you know, trying to, you know, cut down the guys, and if you know, you can see what happened next to him, he'd have like 12 arrows stuck in him, probably. So it wouldn't be a very pretty sight. And you know, here is King Edward of England counting the French dead after the battle. So the French army was utterly shattered in this battle. They weren't able to recover for a significant amount of time afterwards. It wouldn't be until a couple decades after this battle the French were able to build up their strength to what it had been before. So if you thought England was ahead in this part of the war, now they're really ahead. They're like so far ahead, they're like 12 laps ahead of you in a car race. That's how far ahead of them they were. So the French also attacked prematurely. So their forces weren't organized like they could have been. So knights were just kind of like impetuously charging forward, you know, and then like get shot to pieces by the English. And they weren't waiting for their reinforcements. And they also severely underestimated the defenses that the English had prepared, because they also had stakes, wooden stakes, driven into the ground to impale the horses if they tried to charge the yeah, and the knights didn't really see that, so they were just, you know, charging when their horses and taken out from under them. So it wasn't very nice. So France attempted to compensate for this very bad defeat by sending a message to Scotland, who were actually one of England's other major enemies at this point, begging them to attack England. And the Scots attacked at a place called the Battle of Neville's Cross on the 17th of October, a couple months after this, in 1346. But King David II of Scotland got captured and ransomed, humiliating Scotland and depriving France of their revenge. And that's a theme throughout the 100 Years' War, is that France will keep asking Scotland to attack England. Scotland attempts to attack England. It doesn't go very well. I guess that's just...
Was Braveheart in this?
No, that was before this.
How much before?
Well, actually, David II was the son of Robert the Bruce.
Oh.
Yeah. So the siege and capture of Calais. So after the battle, the English army had marched unopposed and besieged and captured it. And it was the new English headquarters on the continent. And even after the 100 Years' War, England was allowed to keep Calais. And it was a tiny little piece of territory called the Pale of Calais, until the French invaded it and took it back. After this, however, another massive victory for the English, the Black Death sort of happened. And that put the war on pause for a while, because everybody was busy dying of plague, you know, the whole bring out your dead, you know, kind of situation. And it happened in 1348. So in 1355, after England was sufficiently recovered from the epidemic, King Edward's son, Edward of Woodstock, also known as the Black Prince, led a series of raids called the Chevauchée from Gascony, penetrating deep into France. Like, they went nearly to the outskirts of Paris, arriving in Normandy and Gascony. So,
is this a different Black Prince?
No, this is the same one. This is the one. There isn't another one. He tried to make King John of France surrender to him, but he couldn't. And this is Prince Edward right here, I believe, at the front of his host right there. Shame he's wearing a helmet. You know, you think they could, take off his helmet so you could see who he was, but I suppose it's important to wear your helmet. Remember when I was showing you guys the fencing presentation,
Yes.
and the guy who had his visor open, he was charging on the horse, and the guy with the two-handed sword got in his mouth.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was not good. So I guess he's kind of learned from that. So anyway, so they had the whole raiding thing, but this was like, if you thought the raids before were bad, this one was like really bad. I don't know how to put it. It's just like they raided more villages in that one campaign alone, more than I think that they had raided in any other campaign before that. Hundreds and upon hundreds instead of dozens. So, and then after this, the Battle of Poitiers, Battle of Poitiers happened, and after King John of France, amid all of these raids and battles and sieges that had just gone in favor of the English, he was still like, I'm not going to surrender to you, which, is a pretty, that's a very, brave move of him to not surrender the English, even after all of these horrible victories for England had happened. Horrible for France, wonderful for England. So it happened on the 19th of September, 1356. The Black Prince's army routed the French, unsurprisingly also using the longbow. France just hadn't figured out this whole bow thing yet. I guess they were still kind of, not really figuring out what had defeated them. I mean, it would be hard because basically everybody died. They couldn't report, right? And then a Gascon noble named Jean de Grailly, Capital de Bouche, I think that's how you pronounce that, led a mounted unit that was concealed in a forest. The French advance was contained by footmen, and on the other side, this guy comes charging around and hits them in the back, smashing them between two opposing units, which also led to a slaughter. And King John was captured and held prisoner in England. So after that, Prince Charles assumed regency of France, but the country fell into a period of lawlessness. Because literally they said the king's been captured, I guess we can just do whatever we want now. Lots and lots of brigands and criminals started attacking places randomly in France, and the devastation from that was actually way worse than the devastation from the English. So, French people tearing their own country apart yet again, right? They're doing it before it was cool. However, the first bad thing to happen to England during the entire war. So in 1359, King Edward invaded France a third time, hoping to take advantage of the aforementioned chaos. So Edward went to whatever, the coronation town, and laid siege, hoping to take the coronation city and be crowned as King of France, to achieve what, the whole point of the war actually was for him to get the crown. But the defenses of that town held, and he was not able to be crowned. So, I guess that was pretty much the first major defeat the English had suffered, the whole point in the war. So then he moved on to Chartres. Okay, that place. On Easter Monday of 1360, the English army was devastated by a freak hailstorm. And it was called Black Monday because most of the English army was killed by a hailstorm.
Wow.
So the French thought,
That's a bad hailstorm.
divine intervention on behalf of France there. And basically, he was forced to negotiate by the French because his entire army had been destroyed. There's nothing he could threaten them with. So a treaty called the Treaty of Bretigny happened, where he forced the English to give up their attack. It didn't work. The war kept going after that, but it was a first sort of timeout. So the first peace, England actually made significant territorial gains, despite being forced to give up, right? So up here is Calais, and that little part of Normandy up there was under English control. And then all of this southwestern area, when originally they just had this little piece you know, all of those raids and things were able to expand their control quite significantly. And how they were able to hold that amount of territory was castles. Castles served as the power projection of medieval statecraft, medieval politics. And so basically, for every little piece of territory here, there was a castle. And there was a lord who lived in that castle who had to project the control of England or France into that specific area. So John II was held captive for 3 years in England until he was ransomed for 3 million crowns, which was basically like the entire GDP of France for 1 year. So it was basically economically as if England had controlled France for basically a year. Economically, of course, not politically. But England allowed him to return to the continent to raise the money for his own ransom by holding citizens of France in his place. So England was like, okay, well, give us a couple of your nobles and 2 guys from every major town in France, and we'll let your king go home so he can make money to give us. And he said, well, that sounds like a better deal than being in English jail, right? You know, so they kind of negotiated that deal. Also, Navarre, this place down here is one of those kingdoms that made up Spain, was also connected to France also, and they thought they had a claim on France. But turns out tiny Navarre trying to invade even a very broke France didn't turn out so great. So Navarre, attempting to enter the 100 Years' War, was swiftly destroyed. Or not destroyed, but like basically they weren't a player. So now going down into Spain also, not just for Navarre, but also in 1366, Castile, or the central part of Spain, it was a kingdom there, had a war of succession of their own. So the armies of the ruling king, Peter of Castile, were pitted against his brother, Henry of Trastamara. And England supported Peter, and France supported Henry, you know, because they had to turn it into a proxy war, you know. And the French expeditionary force was led by a very famous Breton knight named Bertrand du Guesclin. I think that's Bertrand, Sir Bertrand. And England said they liked Castile and they wanted to help Peter, but they were broke. Even with all the French ransom money, they said like, we're gonna sit this one out, but like we support you. You know, we're gonna be your spiritual help. We're gonna cheer you on. Well, it turns out, you know, spiritual help doesn't help materially in terms of war, right? Except for morale, I guess. But they couldn't defeat them with their morale. You know, maybe French World War I generals should like figure that one out too. Because that was quite literally an actual military doctrine of France in World War I. We're going to charge at them so fast, and our morale is going to help us defeat the enemy somehow. Turns out morale is no match for machine gun bullets, but that's World War I and not the 100 Years' War. But basically, England didn't help, and France won, so their guy got to become king. And monetary difficulties and a dispute over taxation in Gascony led to the resumption of the war in France. So basically, like, England was like collecting more tax money from Gascony than they should have been, because Gascony is still technically a part of France, although it's controlled by England. And basically the French king was like, you're taking our money, that's like our money, so like we're gonna go to war with you again. And then the next attack from England didn't come at the head, the king wasn't at the head of this attack, it was a guy named John of Gaunt. And he was a prominent English military commander, and he led his troops across France as another chevauchée, like Prince Edward's, but it wasn't nearly as successful, mostly because they got hungry. They ran out of supplies, basically. So even with all the raiding, France was still so broke that they couldn't even just steal food from peasants, because like they couldn't steal enough food. It was bad. So also they avoided engaging the enemy directly, once again, due to their poor supplies. So the force set off from Calais with 9,000 men, and their goal was to go down to Gascony. So many men and horses died while on the campaign, and they had to discard most of their equipment on the side of the road. Because they were like, can't keep walking with this suit of armor. I'm just gonna leave it," which was like leaving your car on the side of the road, because a suit of armor was pretty much the price of a car, if not more, for a nice one. The English force did reach Bordeaux, and the campaign, however, despite raiding across France, there wasn't really much to raid, so it was kind of a you win some, you lose some kind of situation. France was really mad about it though, so they did succeed in making France angry.
Oh.
So I think, therefore, personally, if I was John of Gaunt, I'd be very satisfied with myself, because making French people angry, I kind of like that. However, England was having their own share of problems. You know, the war's not going so great for them anymore. In poor health, the Black Prince returned to England in January of 1371, where his father, Edward III, was elderly and also in poor health. So, like, both of England's two big leaders are both dying of disease. The prince's illness was debilitating, and he died on the 8th of June, 1376. Edward died in 1377, and he was succeeded by the child monarch Richard II, while actual political power was handled by a regency council. So basically, the prince predeceased his father, and then his father died, and then his very young, I think it was his nephew, Richard II, succeeded him when he was 10 years old. All hail the new king of France. The new king of England and France. He's 10 years old. But, you know, there was a regency. So the resumption of the war in France led to losses of the English fiefs on the continent. So a lot of their territorial gains that I had mentioned when they had the peace were basically lost. Like parts here in the east were starting to get recaptured by France, because the English forces on the continent weren't what they could be. With only Calais and some other coastal areas still under English control. So John of Gaunt became the de facto leader of England. He emerged as the head of the Regency Council. And England suffered a lot of political crises, such as a revolt by this guy named Wat Tyler. So he was a peasant who was angry about being taxed, and he told a lot of other peasants who were also angry about being taxed to do a revolt. So there was a revolt. He got put down. A lot of other guys got put down. You know, you kind of have, tax evasion, right? So they tried to do a big tax evasion, but it didn't work out so good. So then England did another campaign in 1380, led by the Earl of Buckingham. So he commanded an expedition to France to aid the Duke of Brittany. So remember that John de Montfort guy?
Mhm.
Yeah, well, he's fighting the French, also on his own terms. And England was like, hey, maybe we should help him out, since we kind of did help him come to power, right? So siege was laid to Troy. We're gonna call it Troy. But the French refused to engage. So they were like, so what? You're besieging us? We can hang out here for 3 years. And then they traveled to Nantes. That's how I've heard that pronounced. And besieged it. But they failed to make the defenders surrender. So basically it's like, oh, I besieged this one place, and they weren't interested. Besieged this other place. Turns out they aren't going to give up either. They're pretty fed up with the English coming in here and trying to take over their castles, right? So Buckingham was forced to give up his siege in January of 1381. In February, he made peace with the new... by the way, this is his own personal war, by the way. This is not the King of England. This is just the Earl of Buckingham declaring war on France as a private person. Because that was the thing that you could do. And in February, he made peace with the new King of France, Charles VI, who had succeeded. That was a typo. Same old King of France, Charles VI. Brittany compensated Buckingham with 50,000 francs for losses incurred while on campaign. So they basically said, sure, you tried to help us out, you lost a lot of money, here's a consolation prize, so that way maybe you might help us in the future. So France had problems too. Charles V and Duke Guesclin both died in 1380, causing France to lose momentum and advantage in the war. So Charles VI, okay, so actually he wasn't a king, sorry. Charles V me confusing my Charles, was succeeded to France at the age of 11 years old, and he was put, so we had two child monarchs fighting each other.
Wow.
Imagine if they just put it in the same room together, they'd probably be buddies, but, political considerations, right? And was put under regency by his uncles until 1388. So France was broke due to war taxation, which caused unrest in the countryside. Not unlike England. They just didn't have a very famous guy leading it. So, Philip II of Burgundy, who was a vassal to France, the uncle of the French king, put together a fleet and an army to invade England in 1386, but the weather was bad, so they couldn't invade. Well, the English Channel isn't always sunshine and pretty, coastal vistas. Sometimes it's thunderstorms, and if you tried to sail even across a very short distance like the English Channel in a medieval ship, things could go rather poorly. So the war once again became proxy-based as a civil war in Portugal had basically two sides, a pro-English side and a pro-French side. There was another war of succession, same old drill. England chooses a side, France chooses their side. And that's Charles VI, that's the new king. He's not terribly ugly, but not terribly handsome either.
He has a broken nose.
Yeah.
Well, he probably got punched in the face by an English guy one time.
Right.
This was him as an adult, by the way, not as a child. So then they had another peace because everyone's broke. So everyone in France and England ran out of money for the war, so they said like, hey, can you put the war on pause for a minute so we can make some money and get our guys, and you can make some money, make your guys. And England, there was a plot against King Richard by a group of lords who wanted to continue the war despite having no money. They were just raging nationalists, I guess. Now, funny thing, this is kind of a proto-nationalism was starting to form on both sides of a war. England was like, damn, we hate those French people. France was like, damn, we hate those English people. So there was kind of a bit of it wasn't like it would be in the 19th century, but there was a bit, there is a conversation historiographically about nationalism in the Middle Ages and how the 100 Years' War might have given France and England a head start on their unification into monolithic cultures. In England, so basically these pro-war lords tried to, do a plot against King Richard, but it didn't work because King Richard had too many supporters who were anti-war. They were like, hey, we literally don't have the money for this. You guys are literally deranged. So on the 18th of June, 1389, the Truce of Loylingham, these English names sometimes are a little tricky
I was
too.
gonna say, that's not.
So was signed, postponing the war for 3 years. So there was an inheritance dispute in England, which resulted in Richard's nephew Henry Bolingbroke attempting to overthrow him, and it did work, and proclaiming himself as Henry IV. So basically, child monarch is out of the picture, and we have a new adult king. Scotland tried invading England again, but they were defeated at the Battle of Homildon Hill in 1402. So, Scotland being useless again in this war. I mean, you'd think that, Scotland, proud warrior culture, very famous for defeating England a bunch of times before this, and then when it comes to the 100 Years' War, somehow being caught with their trousers down, right? However, who actually was about to give England some trouble? Wales. So, discontent with English supremacy in Wales led Owain Glyndwr, is how I've heard his name pronounced, to start an uprising in England in 1400. And it went well in the beginning. He was taking over some places. He made it as far as some towns in the very middle of England. He even had troops and supplies and money sent to him by France. Even some Spanish, some Castilians tried to help by raiding the coastline of England. So basically, England was having a three-pronged attack on them. France had sent troops to this Welsh dude, and also Spain was attacking them in the south, in the coastline. Wasn't directly related, But the Welsh guy was like, hey, France, wouldn't it be really great if you could hire me some Spanish mercenaries to attack England and distract them, right? However, you know, the power of his army relative to England was not super great. He had basically survived on maneuvering alone. The English caught him and destroyed him. And the revolt was put down in 1415, which it lasted for 15 years, which is pretty impressive considering that, you know, he's basically on the run, always one step ahead of the English, this Owain Glyndwr guy. So it was rather impressive considering he managed to make it last 15 years. So then France, you know, deciding that not just England needed to have a problem domestically, they needed to as well. So there was an Armagnac versus Burgundian civil war. So in 1392, Charles VI of France just lost his marbles. He just went insane. He couldn't govern the country anymore, creating a power vacuum in France. So Philip the Bold, Duke of Burgundy, and his brother Louis Valois, Duke of Orleans, fought each other for control. So Philip died, and John the Fearless took up the Burgundian cause and ordered Louis to be killed, which he was, in broad daylight, by the way. He just sent some assassins to kill him, and it just kind of happened. So this became public knowledge that Philip had been killed, Louis had been killed by John, and the Count of Armagnac took up the side against John. And both sides, actually, this wasn't really an English versus French thing. This is who is going to be, they both wanted England to help them. So they're like, hey, England, choose me. Hey, England, choose me. And England was like, I don't know, we'll figure it out later. We'll see which one of you is stronger in a minute. So in 1418, the Burgundians captured Paris, and the Count of Armagnac and his followers were slaughtered. 1,000 to 5,000 people were murdered in broad daylight. So it was a happy, fun time, wasn't it? Piracy, sponsored by England, ravaged trade in the English Channel, raising tensions between England and France even further. Henry IV demanded the hand of Catherine of Valois, daughter of the insane King Charles VI, in marriage. But the French refused him because they're like, wow, if you marry her, like, we're basically just giving up our country to you. So, preparing to resume the full-scale war. So, England resumed the whole war after Henry IV died in 1413 and was replaced by his eldest son, Henry V, who you might know from Shakespeare. This incident was actually made into a Shakespeare history play. So France was still in chaos due to Charles VI having lost his mind and nobody really figured out who's going to govern the country. So in August 1415, Henry V sailed to France and took Harfleur in a siege ending on September 22. They then resolved to evacuate at Calais, and the French army pursued him until he was stopped at a place called Agincourt. Yes, this is the other really famous battle. And he had a smaller army than France, but he won due to the use of the longbow against the French knights. France still not having learned their lesson. So they're like, how many times do I have to teach you this lesson, old man? You know, and 40% of the French nobility was killed in this battle alone. So having half of the country lose its half of its frontal cortex, as it were. And the English took way more prisoners than they had soldiers, making it kind of a security problem. Each soldier has to look after 2 to 3 French people. And if I had to look after 2 to 3 French people, I might just, you know, I'm just going to let you go here. So yeah, not a fun time. So this is when the war started to go back in favor of England. So then they had a Treaty of Troyes, where basically Henry retook much of Normandy, including Caen and Rouen, Rouen. That on thing, I can't do it. On the 19th of January, 1419, turning Normandy English for the first time in 2 centuries. All of Normandy, not just little pieces of it. A formal alliance was made with Burgundy. England and Burgundy were like, you know, we're gonna fight France together. And Burgundy had taken Paris in 1418. So even the capital wasn't safe from the aggression of the pro-English side. A formal alliance was made with Burgundy in 1420, And Henry met with King Charles VI, where they signed this treaty, and also Henry got Charles's daughter's hand in marriage, and that would make him the heir to France. Also, the Dauphin, or the heir apparent to France, was declared illegitimate. They just said, you're illegitimate now. Not really presenting any evidence. And Henry also entered and occupied Paris himself. So, you know, massive humiliation on the French, which they deserve. The Scottish attack, a third one, because Scotland just keeps coming back from war. But this time it didn't happen in Britain, it happened on the continent. Because France is actually employing Scottish mercenaries. So the Scots attacked England while in France, and they actually won this time. So, you know, gotta give credit where credit is due. They did manage to learn from their mistakes, I guess. In a place called Baugé, if that's how you pronounce that, where the person who was ruling England in the king's place, Thomas, Duke of Clarence, was killed. So England lost their leader again. You know, so it was pretty bad for England. So then, both of the kings died at basically the same time. Henry V returned to France and went to Paris. He went to Chartres, and Gatineau, before returning to Paris. From there, he decided to attack a place called Meaux. The siege was a far more difficult one than he had first imagined. And the siege began on October 6th, 1421, and the town held for 7 months. So more than half of a year, before finally falling on 11th of May, 1422. So he got tied up in a really long siege. He wasn't expecting it to last so long. And at the end of May, his family decided to come and visit him while he was doing the siege. So he was joined by his queen, and together with the French court, they went to rest at Senlis. I think that's how you pronounce that. And while they were there, they got dysentery, you know, because drinking dirty water. So then they went to a place called Vincennes, where he died on the 31st of August. Charles VI, she died before him. His wife predeceased him. And Charles died very soon after this on the 21st of October. So Henry's 9-month-old son replaced him as king. So this is our youngest child monarch yet, starting a new regency. And the Duke of Bedford became the de facto ruler. So then there was another battle called the Battle of Verneuil. Okay, we're gonna go with that. And it happened on 14th of August, 1424. So actually just a couple days ago, the anniversary of this battle. At the Battle of Baugé, the Duke of Clarence rushed into battle without the support of his archers. So forgetting about England's best weapon. However, in this battle, the archers actually did like a good job, you know, like they usually do, against a combined Franco-Scottish force. And the effect of the battle virtually destroyed the Dauphin's field army and eliminated the Scots as a significant military force for the rest of the war. So, good going, England. So then, this lady, you might have heard of, just kind of came out of the woodwork. So the English besieged Orleans in 1428, in October 1428, which led to a months-long stalemate. And the city suffered food shortages that made their surrender basically imminent. Like they were, you know, just holding on for dear life. Joan of Arc just kind of showed up out of nowhere in April. Don't worry, we'll talk about that. In April 1429, and begged the Dauphin Charles VII to let her go to the siege and defeat the English, citing instructions from God. You know, so that's pretty interesting. She entered the city on April 29, after which the tide of the war began to turn against the English within a matter of days, as she basically relieved the city by leading the army to Orleans. She led the French against the English besiegers and they won. So also, at this time, the first ever drawing of a cannon just kind of showed up. This is that same siege, and the monk, I guess, writing this picture here, because that's who did it, was like, hey, I heard about this thing, like this metal tube that shoots fire. It's pretty cool, I guess. I don't know really what it does, but it sounds pretty scary. Let me draw one of those. Which is pretty interesting. They actually did use a lot of cannons in this war. Pretty much the first war where that was first European war where cannons were used in a big way. So then Joan of Arc, let's talk a little bit more about her. So she was born in 1412 to a small-holding peasant family in this, hamlet called Domremy. And she claimed that she had received visions from the Archangel Michael, Saint Margaret, and Saint Catherine, asking her to defend France against the English. Alright, checks out. So she went to go see, television being a thing again, Charles VII to ask him to lead the French against the English, and I guess she must have had God's help because this random peasant lady was just given command over the French army. So she drove away the English at Orleans and won a lot of victories, including this battle called Patay, which allowed Charles VII to get to the coronation place to be coronated. So, however, she didn't win as much after this, as she failed to recapture Paris. She was also caught by the Burgundians and turned over to the English, where she was accused of being a heretic or a witch, depending on who you ask. And she was burned at the stake at the age of 19 in 1431. However, the judgment against her was overturned by the Inquisition in 1456, and her cause for canonization was open. And she was canonized in 1920, so she's actually Saint Joan of Arc.
So the English burned her, or
Yeah, the English burned her after the Burgundians captured her.
Oh.
Yeah. So it wasn't a French on English thing. It was definitely an English fabrication. And that's what led Pope Calixtus III to say hey, you know that Joan of Arc lady? I heard about her once. Are you sure that she really was a heretic? You guys should look into that. And then the Inquisition looked into it and they basically nah, that's just English BS. She's good. However, the war is about to get over, as everyone is so tired of the fighting. So Henry VI was crowned King of England at Westminster Abbey, and also anti-King of France on the 16th December 1431. And Joan of Arc was killed on the 30th of May 1431. So much of the English leadership was now in favor of peace, as they thought they could quit while they were ahead, as they had made significant territorial gains at this point. And Burgundy had broken their alliance with England because they're we're actually not going to do this whole 100 Years' War thing anymore. We're going to focus on ourselves. So in the 1435 Treaty of Arras, England was forced to give up Paris. France had modernized its army and created a professional force that used cannons to win sieges in a matter of weeks that would have taken months. And in 1449, France had retaken Rouen, which was the last northern base of England that wasn't Calais. So then, the last actual battle of the 100 Years' War, the Battle of Castillon, happened. So Charles VII's successful campaign in Normandy happened in 1450. He concentrated his efforts on Gascony, which was the last province held by the English. Bordeaux was besieged and taken by the French on the 30th of June 1451. Due to the English sympathies of the Gascon people, because the Gascony actually liked being English. They were England is actually cool. We should, be with them. However, John Talbot and his army retook the city, and the English were decisively defeated at the Battle of Castillon, which ended their rule in Gascony. So they might have taken back the capital, but then they had a field battle and they lost, and they had to get out. However, they weren't so ready to just give up, even though they had been thoroughly beaten. So technically the war lasted another 20 years, although nobody actually counts that. They just forgot to make a peace treaty. And also, England would not attack. They had lost so much money, because they lost Gascony, and that was a lot of their money. And now they don't have that money from Gascony anymore, so there's not really anything they can do about it. So after this, England had another civil war. So following the loss of the continental possessions, they were broke, and there was a civil war in England between two branches of the royal family, the York and the Lancastrians. And this was called the War of the Roses. Now, why is it called the War of the Roses? Because both of them used a rose as their symbol. One of them was white, one of them was red. I think York had the red one, Lancaster had the white one. The Yorks won, but their victory was short-lived as Henry VII of Tudor succeeded them and started the rule of the House of Tudor, who you might remember for such wonderful kings as Henry VIII.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, might discuss that.
So the Yorks and the Lancasters were what family?
Branches of the Plantagenets.
So that was the end of the Plantagenet.
Yeah, they were. Yeah, the main line had gone extinct, and these two cadet branches were fighting each other. So basically, that's the end.
That's it?
Yeah.
The war's over?
Well, okay. So that's not. We have a bit of an epilogue for France. So England kept Calais, as I mentioned, but they lost everything else, and France recovered after the war. You know, the 100 Years' War, despite lasting 100 years, and I told you about all this devastation, this horrible, what we would call war crimes today happening, it really wasn't as bad as a lot of other wars in history you might have heard of. As the 100 Years' War, if you do factor in disease, might have only had a couple, like maybe 1 to 2 million people died. Compare that with the 30 Years' War, 8 million people died, which is a whole other war that I'm not going to talk about, as it really deserves its own lecture.
It's awesome. Okay.
Thank you. Any questions?
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right.
That's enough about the war.
Yeah, I think. Yeah, even I'm a little tired about the whole war
Tired
thing.
of war.
Well, so.